What's up, world? It's Ethan Stone here, and today we're going to be talking about race. Now, I want to start with a question. Wouldn't it be nice if you have kids, your kids could grow up in a world where nobody, and I mean nobody, ever was discriminated against or oppressed or endangered because of the way they look or the way you look? I think we can all agree, or hopefully we can all agree, that would be really lovely. But a lot of people feel like that's a really long time away. The point at which we can get there is super far away. I believe that it could come a lot sooner than we think if we started teaching the truth to ourselves, to each other, in our schools, etc., instead of perpetuating the lies that have actually been really harmful. So I want to start off this video by talking about my motivation for making it, which is that, growing up, a lot of times people have asked me what ethnicity I am, what race are you? I've always struggled to answer that question because I've never really believed in the idea that there is some special thing about a certain race versus another race that makes that person different. I've always felt like if you want to get to know somebody, you have to get to know them, and you're not going to do that by stereotyping. But ultimately, I did grow up and realized, we have the World Wide Web, we can do the research on our own. So I started researching and found in fact that I was not just right, that there was a lot more to this conversation than I even realized. So I just want to share some basic information with you today. We're going an article that I found, and this is all happened. I've been searching the internet for like 5 minutes, and I opened up a couple of tabs. First one is National Library of Medicine. So that's this web URL here. So I'm just going to open up another tab from them. And here, this paragraph that's highlighted in purple says, in 2003, phase 1 of the Human Genome Project demonstrated that humans populating the Earth today are on average 99.9% identical at the DNA level. There is no genetic basis for race, and there is more genetic variation within a race than between them. So I think one of the important things to note, besides what it's actually saying, is that this is a government article from the National Library of Medicine. This is a .gov website. This is not me spouting conspiracy theories. This is your own government, if you're American, telling you the truth that you generally will not find on television, and you generally won't be taught in school, unfortunately. So here's another article that this is just like a snippet from this article that's on Wikipedia. And it says, there is no broad consensus across the biological and social sciences that race is a social construct. Sorry, there is broad consensus across the biological and social sciences that race is a social construct, not an accurate representation of human genetic variation. Humans are remarkably genetically similar, sharing approximately 99.9% of their genetic code with one another. So basically echoing what that other government website was saying. Here's another article. This is from humanorigins.si.edu. So this is some kind of university. I'll have to find out what SI is, I will. But it says, while genetic difference between individual humans today is minuscule, about 0.1% on average, study of the same aspect of the chimpanzee genome indicates a difference of about 1.2%. So the reason I wanted to share that is because chimpanzees are our closest living relatives besides the bonobo. And so this is saying that if you took two random chimpanzees, on average, they're going to have a 1.2% genetic difference. And if you take two random humans, like from other continents, their difference is going to be 1/12 as significant as the difference between two random chimpanzees. So here's an interesting thought that I came up with, which is thinking about siblings. So this article says, because of recombination, siblings only share about 50% of the same DNA on average. So while biological siblings have the same family tree, their genetic code might be different in at least one of the areas looked at in a given test. That's true even for fraternal twins. So even in fraternal twins, you can have a difference in genetic DNA. And in regular siblings, that genetic difference could be on I guess, average 50%. So if you think about this, if you go back to the 0.1% genetic difference between two human beings, and you say, okay, so if you have two human beings who are complete strangers from other ends of the world, the genetic difference between them is 0.1%. But if you have a father chimpanzee and a mother chimpanzee, you're talking about, and these are our closest living relatives, mind you, a 1.2% difference between those two chimps, which means that even siblings on average are going to have a roughly 0.6% genetic difference, which is fully 6 times the amount of difference between randomly selected humans. So I won't hang on this for too long, but just to drive the point home, as far as my math is concerned, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you're out there and you're a scientist, please. I've never seen this article published, but I just randomly came up with this thought on my own, is that randomly human beings are 6 times more similar or have a 0.5% less genetic difference than two sibling chimpanzees. And chimpanzees are our closest living relatives. So the point of that is that even strangers who've never met each other and grew up on opposite ends of the world and are quote unquote different races, even though race is a myth, but if people want to call them that, fine, they are so similar that they're way, way more similar than siblings would be if you were looking in chimpanzee populations, and those are our closest living relatives. Let's see, what other article do I have here? Oh, mitochondrial Eve. So if you don't know about mitochondrial Eve, in a nutshell, this is according to Wikipedia, in human genetics, the mitochondrial Eve is the matrilineal most recent common ancestor of all living humans. Once again, most recent common ancestor of all living humans. Where did she come from? She came from South Africa. When did she live? Approximately 200,000 years ago. So mitochondrial Eve was a woman who lived 200,000 years ago, who had enough daughters and a continuous chain that her mitochondrial DNA survived Homo sapiens eventually migrate across the African continent around 120,000 years ago. So what this is saying, and this is, again, not a conspiracy, you can look this up on your own, this is real. 100% of human beings on the planet Earth all descended directly from a single woman 200,000 years ago. And that is why this is true. That is why 99.9% of your DNA is identical to my DNA, is identical to anybody else's DNA. And furthermore, we are family. I think that when you think of family, you think, these are the people that I grew up with. So from that sense, we're all growing up on the same little marble. But also when you think of family, you think these are people that I'm genetically related to. Well, guess what? You are genetically 99.9% identical to everybody else on average. I mean, it could be plus or minus a very small amount. But the interesting thing to note is, and let me try to find where this was, the genetic variation across quote unquote races is actually tends to be a larger difference than the genetic difference between two different types of races. So in other words, if you identify as Caucasian or African or Asian, there's a very good chance that you are more genetically dissimilar to the other person in your community who technically is from the same place than from somebody else on another corner of the world, or not corner, but another part of the world. So I guess I'm going to wrap this video up. I had wanted to use ChatGPT, but it was kind of freezing on me. Let me see if I can get it to load. Oh yeah, it's loading. So let me just see if I can paste in here. No, that's the article. So I'm going to write, please write a script explaining sorry, I'm typing one-handed, so my spelling is not going to be all that great. Explaining the myth of race. So let's see what it comes up with. Please. There we go. So, ChatGPT is amazing, but I certainly wouldn't have wanted to start with it because it is prone to inaccuracy. So I think the point here is we've already fact-checked this information. And if you're watching this on the internet, that means you have the internet, which means you can fact-check this too. But just to kind of put this in a little bit more of an organized argument form, what ChatGPT 3 wrote is, the concept of race has been around for centuries, but it is important to understand that the idea of race is a myth. We've already determined that to be true. The concept of race is a social construct and does not have a biological basis. Scientific studies have shown that there is more genetic diversity within racial groups than between them. That's what I was just talking about before we opened this up. The racial categories used in society today were created for political and social reasons, not for scientific ones. That's something I would love to touch more on in another video, but maybe just a little bit in this video once we get to the bottom. The concept of race has been used to justify systems of oppression such as slavery and segregation. The idea of racial superiority has no basis in fact and has been debunked by numerous scientific studies. Despite this, the myth of race continues to have real-world consequences and perpetuates harmful stereotypes and discrimination. Conclusion: understanding that race is a myth is crucial in the fight against racism and discrimination. It is important to challenge the harmful beliefs and systems that are based on the myth of race. I can't agree with this more. I believe that the best way to fight racism, which hopefully you're on board with, is to actually teach the truth that race is a myth. I mean, I don't know how we're not teaching this in 2023 in our schools. I can say I was lucky enough to go to one of the best colleges in the country, Princeton University. And not only was that not taught to me, but I know for a fact they're not teaching this now. And this is, a major scientific research institution, but they're not alone. Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Columbia, all those schools, all the schools in the country, as far as I know, are teaching the same basic storyline, which just perpetuates this myth that is not rooted in any scientific fact whatsoever. So I'm gonna, I think, end it here, because if I go in, it starts to get into the kind of dark and depressing aspects of why all this stuff was created. But in a nutshell, from my understanding, and you really ought to fact check this if you're interested, my understanding is that the reason race was invented, and let's just see, when was the term for race invented? Let me just put my phone down here. When was the term race invented? Okay, what is it? The word race, interpreted to mean an identifiable group of people who share a common descent, was introduced into English in about 1580 from the Old French race, 1512, from Italian razza. So 1580. Well, what was going on around 1580? Well, let's just see when the transatlantic slave trade started up. Let's see. So when did the transatlantic slave trade begin? Okay, so approximately 1526 is when the slave trade started. And if we go back, the word race was invented in 1580. Now, you might be wondering, why would they have invented this term after the slave trade was started? Well, my research has told me, and again, I suggest you research this yourself, my research has taught me that the problem that the people who invented race out of thin air, it was complete whack science. There was no science to it. They just lied. But the reason that they invented it is because originally the justification for the transatlantic slave trade was that the people that they were taking from the continent of Africa were heathens, which simply means they weren't Christians. However, many of those people, once they came to America, began to convert to Christianity. And that became very problematic for the Christians in America. They needed to be able to feel good about themselves, and not feel like they were going to be judged by God. So they came with this idea that there were, these different levels of human, And the interesting thing is this concept didn't exist prior to the 1500s. Before that, you have histories of all the continents on Earth enslaving each other, enslaving people who look just like them for since since prehistoric times, since like over 11,000 years ago. We have evidence of that. And if you just research slavery in, say, Egypt, for example, you'll find they had this elaborate slavery program that lasted, the Egyptian empire lasted 5,000 years, and they had like 4 different categories of slaves. They had slaves that were born into slavery. They had slaves who sold themselves into slavery because they couldn't pay their debts. They had slaves who were taken because they were prisoners of war. They had slavery, they had slaves who were paid. There were actually women who were paid slaves because, they basically sold themselves into slavery or were sold into slavery, but they, I guess, worked within the kind of higher noble kind of part of the Egyptian culture. And for whatever reason, those slaves were paid. It doesn't really sound like slavery when you're getting paid, but then we start to ask ourselves about, present day, is there something akin to slavery that some people are experiencing today, even though they're getting paid? So again, I promised myself I'm not getting into the crazy conspiracy circle tonight, not on this video. I just wanted to talk about something that is very real, very scientific, which is the fact that race was made up to justify slavery. And while I definitely support the progress in the fight against racism, I think ultimately we're just going to keep making the same mistakes and going in the same loop. We're gonna have what they call it, a revolution, which is a circle. What we want is evolution, which is an upward spiral. We want to evolve out of the myth that we made up for ourselves to justify something we never should have been doing in the first place, because we're all family. And we want to start thinking in terms of the truth, nothing more. I want the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. And the whole truth is that you and I and every human being on earth are, on average, 99.9% identical, which basically makes us super siblings if you look and compare us to our closest relatives, the chimpanzees and the bonobos. I'm Ethan Stone. Thank you to the 2 of you who made it this far into this video. I really appreciate it. And I probably won't be making too many of these things because my main thing is just talking about DJing and having fun. But there is a connection there because as a DJ, my whole goal, and I think I speak for most, if not all, the DJs on this planet and musicians too, our goal is to bring people together, to, think of humanity as a unified whole. We are one family. We are family. And that is the message I want to leave you with today. We are family. One love, as Bob Marley said, one love, one heart. Let's get together and feel all right. Peace out.